What's up guys, my name is Michael Ayres and welcome to my photography channel. As we begin this video, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who gave a lot of support for my last critique video. I've been getting DMs and text messages telling me that the critiquing session that I did really helped them learn a lot as to how to compose their images and also what to look out for when they're photographing in their own church. And that portfolio review session really opened the doors because now another photographer has stepped up and wanted me to look at their images and tell you guys what I think about their stuff. So before we get started on this review, let's just take a look and see what kind of photography gear that they're working with. Alright, so they say that they use the Panasonic G7 and use three lenses, the first being the Rokinon 35mm 1.5, a Lumix 25mm 1.7, and a 14 through 42mm 3.5 lens. And they say that they edit all of their photos in Lightroom. Alright, we know what they are working with, and now let's go to their first photograph. We are going to be starting our critiquing session with this first photograph of what appears to be a father holding his daughter. So what I like about this image is that the photographer didn't put the subjects directly in the middle of the frame. The father is toward the far left side of the frame while holding his daughter, who is in the middle a little bit, but the majority of our eyes seem to be set into the center left of the frame. If you are a beginning photographer, the first concept that you should learn is about the rule of thirds. It's a compositional technique which basically says that for the majority of our images, we want to have the subjects either to the center left or to the center right. There's just something subconscious in our minds that tells us that something that's not directly center is more pleasing to the eye. Now to the critiquing portion of this image, the only thing that I don't like is that the daughter is looking down. It just kind of begs the question of where is she looking at, or what is she looking at? Now in this sample photograph, we have a father holding his son, and the child is looking in the same direction as his dad. So that's something to keep in mind, that you want to have your child either looking the same direction as the parents, or doing something cute where they are lifting their hands up as well, clapping their hands, or maybe even looking all cutesy at the camera. Any of these photo options are better options than if a child was just looking at the ground. And with that being said, we have our second image here of a drummer, and the first thing I like is that the shutter speed is high enough to where he was able to freeze the action. The composition isn't bad because the drummer, who is our main point of interest, is off to the right, which allows for the cymbals and the rest of the drum kit to lead over to him. I have two minor critiques about this photograph. Now the first critique is that the drummer is blocking half of his body. His arm is raised like this and it's blocking all of this. Personally, when photographing a drummer, I like to catch them when their hand is being raised from the opposite side. It just makes for a more intriguing action shot. But what I would really prefer is actually if the photographer would get on the platform, get in front of the drum cage, and get a shot from that angle. It's just a different point of view, but it could also make something a lot more interesting than if it was just photographed from the side. And if you are nervous about walking onto your platform at church, honestly, I wouldn't even worry about it, because if you are acting as if you belong there, then no one would talk to you and say, hey, get off the platform, because you look like you belong there, photographing and documenting the service. So again, I believe either photograph the drummer head on or photograph them off to the side, but make sure that their opposite hand from your lens is being raised. And the second critique that I have with the drummer is that it seems to be a little bit underexposed. I don't know what ISO settings you were using for this photograph, but in post-editing, I would raise up the exposure just a notch. Okay, so going to our next image, it appears to be a side shot of the praise team. And the first thing that I like about this photograph is that there's a lot of depth to the image. We do see that the singer in the middle is the main subject, and of course the background is all layered out with other people, but that allows us for our eyeballs to basically bounce around the entire image and see what else is there to look at. Now critiquing this photograph, even though I feel that the spacing of all of these singers is cool, what I don't like is that the bottom of the singers' feet are all chopped off. The main woman in the middle and then the girl off to her left, both of their feet are just cut off in the image, and it just kind of makes me feel like it's not complete. So my personal suggestion would be to either photograph them up close or take a step back and take a wide shot to incorporate the entirety of the scene. In this sample image right here, I opted to go more in, because personally I feel that anything waist up is kind of more flattering than a wider image. In this other sample photograph, I was able to get a wide shot of the entire praise team. There's a lot of depth to the photograph, and you can clearly see everybody in the image, but most importantly, everyone's in the photograph. In the end, it's up to you to figure out how you want to feature a certain singer. I would just say figure out for yourself which part of the extreme do you want to do, either a wide shot or a close-up. So this next image is of the same praise singer who was featured in the last photograph. So the first thing that I want to give praise for is that the photographer was using the rule of thirds. Again, they placed their subject to the left of the frame. So while they used that photography concept, there is still one problem with the image that I'll tell you about, and that is the positioning of the singer who is singing at the corner of the frame. You don't really know what's beyond her microphone. microphone. All you see is just the piano player right behind her, which would have been a cooler photograph if the subjects were flipped around, if the piano player was on the left side and the singer was on the right side. So that's another thing to consider. Yes, use the rule of thirds, have them to your center left or center right, but make sure that your subjects are looking in the appropriate direction that leads the viewer to see the rest of the image. Now in this sample photograph, it is pretty similar to the last picture. We have the praise singer as the main focus with a musician in the background that's blurred out. The only difference now is composition. We had the singer more center right in the frame, but because her arm is extended out, it gives the left side of the image some more breathing room and doesn't have the audience's eyes just stuck to the very far left side of the photograph like the last image. So in essence, just leave some breathing space for whatever direction that your singer is facing. So this photograph is another feature of a praise singer, and the first thing that I noticed about the image was that it was a tad bit out of focus. If you are a beginning photographer, the first thing you should keep in mind is, are my images sharp? Because it is kind of a bummer when you have a really good looking photograph and it could potentially be messed up because it's slightly out of focus. And sort of along the critique of the previous images, I have a problem that her feet are cut out of the image. Once again, either go wide or do a close-up. Now in this sample photograph, I would like the photographer to try something else to try to make a feature of one praise singer look a lot more interesting. And that is photographing them off to the side, but using other praise singers as the foreground leading to the back of the image, which is where the praise singer will be. Just minor tweaks like that can make a photo of one praise singer look a lot more interesting than if you were to photograph them by themselves with nobody else around them. Obviously, with the last sample photograph, the praise singer was by themselves with no other foreground, and I'm not saying that that single photograph compared to this photograph is better or worse. It's just another compositional option for you to use. Alright, so in this image, we have finally seen our first musician photograph, and not just any musician. This is gospel legend Frankie Taylor. If you don't know who Frankie Taylor is, I recommend you looking him up on YouTube and iTunes and whatever, especially look up his song More Than Amazing. It's pretty fire. But anyways, now the first thing that I like about this photo is how expressive he is. He's all into this song with his arms in the air. But now with the gripe that I have on this photograph is that once again the subject's feet is just cropped off in the bottom of the frame. Of course what you can do is just crop in on the image and hide that awkwardness at the very bottom of the frame. But then the more you crop in, the more kind of washed out and less pixels that you have to make the image look sharper. And the other critique would be that his left hand is kind of blocked off from the praise singer's hand. So this photograph would have been a little bit better if he just maybe took a step to the left. So I do understand if the photographer didn't have enough time to really compose the image in the most ideal way, but just for review purposes regarding a portfolio, I wouldn't keep this image for those two reasons, because it's cropped off and the positioning of the left hand being blocked off by the praise singer's hand. In this sample image right here, I got really close to the organ player and used my wide angle lens, and I was able to capture a very similar photograph with the organist raising his hand in the air. Personally, for me, I want musician shots to be taken up close. I like shots that are taken in a musician's personal space. It makes the shot look more intimate, and you have an opportunity to have a photograph with the musician with the audience in the background. That's one way you can get around having a blank wall behind a musician. Just be a little bit more creative and just try to figure out those angles that can get more things or more context in the background. So here's another lesson on the concept of perspective. Don't just think that all of your shots can just be from the audience towards the altar. On the contrary, I believe that you should walk up to the platform, get really close to the musicians, and photograph the opposite direction and aim at the audience. It just makes for more satisfying and pleasing photographs. And it helps by separating your photographs by everybody else who don't think like you do. Now in this photograph, I like the emotion that this person is showing, but I have two problems with this picture. The first being that the fingertips are all cut off, and two, the eyes on the subject are not sharp. Here's another photograph of pretty much the same thing. I do like how the person on the far left is being used as a foreground. Once again, just like in the last photograph, this person's hands are all cut off at the very top of the photograph. Again, please keep in mind that we don't want to chop up any body parts. And also for worship photos, we want to make sure that if we are photographing somebody whose hand is raised, we want to make sure that it's the opposite hand, because it looks like this person is trying to give us a high five when it really should be the left hand that's being raised, to kind of make it more of a cleaner looking image. Here is a sample photograph where you can either photograph them a little bit more towards their front, but still keeping it at a little bit of an angle so it's not directly right in their face. Or you can photograph them off to the side, like the photographer's original images, and the people on the same row as her are kind of a leading line leading up to her as the main subject. Here's another sample photo of a guy praying, and once again, I'm close up to him, and again we have the people in the background leading up to him as the main subject. So when we go back to the original photographs, the emotion is there. The hand gestures are there too. It's just the execution of making sure that they are sharp while also trying to photograph them in a way that's interesting and not chopping off their limbs. Alright, so we have another image of the same drummer from before, smiling, having a good time, fiddling with his earpiece. But when I think of drummer shots, I'm thinking of a drummer actually being in action. And I think that's what church people want to see too. Alright, so we finally got to our first baptism photo. And it's not bad. The photograph seems sharp. There's people in the foreground leading up to the main subject of the person who got baptized. We have arms being raised and a nice prayer face from the lady. The only critique that I would have would be the photograph being straight on at the subject. Personally, I like most of my baptism photographs a little bit off to the side. There's a very high chance that when they get out of the water and when they're getting really into their prayer, that they might actually get a double chin and make it very hard to find very flattering photographs. So I tend to find that photographing from the side kind of helps alleviate that a bit, because then you can have the accentuating jaw lines and also helps make the arms look a little bit more slimmer. But if there is no space for you to go other than directly in front of them, then I would photograph straight on just to get that safety shot. But then I would lift my camera up high and aim down, hoping that the subject will possibly look up in prayer, thereby extending their chin and having a much more flattering look, because then there's no possibility of a double chin. If you look at this sample photograph right here, you'll see that it was pretty much the exact same situation. I was facing head on to the main subject, but I decided to lift the camera up higher above my head. And it paid off because the person had their hands raised and they lifted up their chin, and it also avoided any possible double chin that they could have had if I decided to photograph them more at eye level. Also, when you photograph from a higher angle, it also clears out the clutter that's happening around the baptistry. But the main thing to keep in mind is trying to figure out which angle is the most flattering when I'm photographing this person who's getting baptized. Alright, so our next photograph is, I guess, what appears to be a microphone stand. And I guess just a portion of the microphone stand. Yeah, the focus seems to be just on the middle of the microphone stand. I don't know if this was a detail shot or if the focus was supposed to be on the piano player. I don't know why this photograph was taken, and I would just leave it out entirely of my portfolio. Sorry if that sounds a bit harsh, but you know, detail shots are really good to do. I would just prefer detail shots of maybe the keys on the keyboard, a detail shot of maybe the actual microphone, a detail shot of maybe the guitar strings, a detail shot of maybe the drumstick hitting the actual drum, a detail shot of hands being raised, hands clapping. So I applaud the effort of a detail shot. I just think that there are more interesting shots in a church that you can take for a detail shot. Alright, so this photograph right here is of a woman placing her head on the shoulder of, I'm assuming is her husband. Photographs of people taken from behind can look good, but we don't really see any expression really. We don't really know what she's thinking, feeling, whatever. So instead of taking the photograph from behind, I would have just opted out to just take the photograph from the front. It probably would have been better if she had maybe her hands on his shoulder as well, to kind of show that she was praying for him, or maybe if he was aiming at her with his opposite arm reaching out and holding on to her. Just something else to kind of give us some more context for what's happening in this photograph. So we have another baptism photograph, and it appears to be a person that I guess just finished getting baptized, and they seem to be sitting in the water, covering their face and just kind of savoring the moment. And I do like the idea of the execution of this photograph, where once again we try to have a person as the foreground leading into the subject in the middle. The only thing that I see really is that the focus seems to be on the actual baptistry than the person. And it's kind of a bummer because the person's a little bit soft and out of focus. With the towel blocking a portion of the subject, I personally would have wished that there was more of a cleaner path to us seeing the subject. But I do applaud the execution of trying to have something in the foreground to try to add some more depth to the image. Here's a sample photograph of something very similar to the last photo, where we had a person on the far right of the image being the foreground, leading into the person in the middle, who we know is the main subject because he's hugging his father. And you do see a little bit of a detail of the water dripping from the son's head down the father's back. And of course in the background we have the minister praying for the subjects in the middle. It's the same idea as the previous photograph, but it's just tighter and closer to the action and seems a bit more intimate. Looking at the original photograph, the execution is pretty close. Another critiquing point too would be that there's a little bit too much space of the far left side of the baptistry. If there were more things in that general space leading up to the subject, then I'd be more okay with it. But because there is so much dead space on the left side of the image, I wish that the photo was a little bit tighter and closer to the subject to make the overall photo look a lot more intimate. Alright, in this photograph we have a person praying with their arm raised out, and it's not a bad photograph. I think the only thing that I can critique on really is that the top of the subject's head is cropped off a little bit. So once again, making sure we kind of take a step back and get the entirety of the person in the image. And I think in the background we have somebody texting on their phone. And that's kind of a pet peeve of mine, where a really powerful photo could be potentially ruined by somebody just making a tweet in the background. So this is something to keep in mind, that even though you have the background blurred out and out of focus, if the viewer can tell what the person is doing, it could potentially distract from the main point of the photograph. So to me, I'm thinking, oh, this guy's praying, he's worshiping, thank you Jesus. Oh, the guy in the background's texting. So that's just something to keep in mind of when you go back to church next Sunday. Just realize, okay, if I'm photographing from behind, what exactly is happening beyond this person that could potentially make or break my image. Alright, so we have our first photograph of a speaker, and this one I'm a little bit torn on. Because in the previous praise singer photo, where I said that they were too far to the left side of the image, with their face looking at the direction of the end of the frame, well, this is pretty much the exact same thing, with the speaker once again looking at the very edge of the picture. And there's a lot of dead space on the left side of the image, so it could both work and not work, depending on what you are trying to do. If you are photographing this with a design in mind to maybe put a Bible verse on the left side of the photograph, then you can make the case that the image is decent enough and that you can use it with that graphic design in mind. But if you are releasing this photograph with no Bible verses or quote or musical lyrics in mind, then I would have to say that it's not a good photograph because of that awkward composition. So again, I am not the photographer. I don't know what they had in mind when they took this image. I just really hope that it was photographed with a design purpose in mind. Oh, so we have another photograph of the same person, and immediately I think that this is a much better photograph than the last one. The speaker is right on that rule of thirds, being on the center right of the image. The only thing that I would really critique would be that the image might be a tad bit too wide. I would once again kind of get closer to the pulpit to make the photograph look more intimate, while also trying to get a photograph of the speaker's hand being stretched out. When taking speaker photographs, you usually want to make sure that their arms are stretched out, because it kind of emphasizes, okay, they're making a point about something. But of course, rules are meant to be broken, as you can see in this image right here, where the speaker doesn't have his arms stretched out, but at the same time we have a different perspective, which is from the altar aiming at the audience. So going back to my previous point, from the photograph with the keyboard player, don't always think that aiming at the pulpit is your only option. Get on the platform, get behind the speaker, and aim towards the audience, and you'll get a lot of much more unique looking photographs. It may feel awkward at first because it's just you and the preacher on the platform, and you don't have the rest of the praise team or the musicians to kind of hide the fact that you're up there. But trust me, once you actually get up there and do it, you'll have a lot more unique looking images that'll sometimes be much more pleasing than if you were to just photograph from the pulpit straight on. And this photograph right here seems to be a wide shot of the sanctuary. It seems to be a pretty standard wide shot, which, you know, there's not really much for me to critique here. But the only thing that I could really point out would be what appears to be, I'm assuming, the sound booth at the very bottom of the image. It's a little bit distracting for me because I would normally not want to see the bottom of the sound booth in the image. If it's a wide shot of the church, I want to see from the chairs up, not from the very edge of the sound booth up. And this could easily be solved by just a simple crop. Another small critique would be the pole that's right in the middle of the sanctuary on our right. And I totally get it. You can't just get rid of a pole that's built right in the middle of your church. But if you look at this sample photograph taken in the exact same church, if you notice on the dark sides of the image on the left, you'll see that exact same pole all the way to the far left of the image. Once again, we're going back to the concept of perspective and knowing that aiming straight on at the altar is once again not our only option. In the sample image, it's the exact same sanctuary, but just by going 10 or maybe 20 steps to the right, it just changed the entire scope of the image dramatically. The church actually looks full, the church looks a lot bigger, but most importantly, we got rid of that pole. Alright, and that's the final image. I had a really good time looking at these photographs and just studying them. I definitely see a lot of potential with this photographer. The three main things that I hope that they would work on this next Sunday would be number one, making sure that the body parts are not chopped off. The second point is to make sure that our images are sharp. And three, just working on composition, trying to figure out which perspective could be the best in a certain situation. And also just work on filling the frame. Not trying to have a lot of dead space in your images, but just composing everything nice and tight. I know that you have a lot of wide angle lenses, which is why I recommend getting at least a 50 or an 85mm lens, just so you can get a little bit closer to your subjects without having to be all up in their face. And that's all that I have for this review, and I really hope that you guys enjoyed this and hopefully learned a thing or two. If you liked what you saw and want to know my thoughts on your work, feel free to message me your photographs at michaelairsphoto@gmail.com. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.